This is K.M. Weiland, and you're listening to the 356th episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I have been reminded this summer of a fact that is always present to all of us, and that is that we as writers get to be part of an amazingly generous, talented, ambitious, imaginative, and appreciative community. Since the very first day I ventured onto Twitter and began connecting with other writers from around the world, I have been astounded and endlessly grateful for the good spirits, the camaraderie, and the encouragement that you bring, not just into my life, but into the lives of all of our fellow authors. I appreciate this so much, just generally, but also specifically on a personal level. Quite a few of you have taken the time this summer to email kind words to me about various things, including my novels, my website, and this podcast. And I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you back. You're a special bunch of people. I'm honored to share this planet with you. And I especially love getting to share the exciting ups and downs of the writing life with you. So thank you. The latest post on my blog is Learn How to Set Up the Potential for Change in Character Arcs. Discover the single most important key to successful change in character arcs. You must use these methods to set up the change right from the start. Learn how Marvel's Ant-Man set up several great examples of changing character arcs. This is a special guest post follow-up to my temporarily completed series, The Do's and Don'ts of Storytelling According to Marvel, which you can find on my site at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And now I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast entitled, How to Outline for NaNoWriMo. Should you outline your novel? Welcome to October, otherwise known as Cram Like Crazy for National Novel Writing Month, which maybe we should call Cry Fo NaNoWriMo. It's got a certain ring, right? So maybe you're a nano veteran. Maybe you're a tentative first-timer. Or maybe you're not interested in writing 50,000 words in 30 days, but you just want to figure out, should you outline your novel and how? Maybe you're intimidated by outlines. They seem like a lot of work. They seem like maybe they'll rob half the fun of actually writing the book. Or maybe you're confused by the whole idea of outlining. What exactly is a novel outline? How do you know where to start? And why does even bringing up the topic seem like launching the first mortar in the dirty border war between plotters and pantsers? So, not to worry, you're about to learn how to love the outline by making it your own. Even better, whether you're preparing for Nano next month or just wanting to crack the code on preparing your next novel, I'm going to show you the secrets of advanced outlining. As many of you probably know, my career as a writing teacher and mentor was basically launched when my first writing how-to book, Outlining Your Novel, became a surprise hit. 5 years ago, when I published the book, I had absolutely no idea how hungry writers were for help outlining their novels. I wrote the book simply because outlining was something that worked so well for me and was a topic I was passionate about. But even now, Outlining Your Novel remains my most popular book. In it, I explain the basic outlining system I used at the time. I still use that same system, but it's grown as I've grown and been refined as I've refined my writing process. Since I've, shockingly, never done a complete series on outlining, which I need to round out my series on story structure and character arcs, I figured it was long past time to remedy that, and NaNoWriMo is the perfect opportunity to launch a definitive series on my updating outlining process. So, over the next few months, I'm going to walk you through the next step up in outlining your novel. If you haven't already read Outlining Your Novel, I do recommend starting there since it will provide the foundation for the next-gen techniques I'll be talking about. You can also get an overview of the outlining process I recommend in a previous podcast episode from last year's Nano series called 6 Tasks You'll Love Yourself for Checking Off Your Nano Pre-Writing List. But before we dive headfirst into the nitty-gritty of how to outline for NaNoWriMo, or any other month, let's cover some important basics today about the what, why, and how of outlining. So before you can understand how to outline, you must first understand what an outline is. It sounds basic, but there are a surprising number of options authors might be talking about when they say they're outlining. And here are the top 3. Number 1, does outlining mean listing scenes? This is probably the most common understanding of an outline. It harks back to those crazy Roman numeral outlines we were required to complete in high school, and which, if you were like anything like me, you probably put together after the fact, once you'd already written your report or book review. Scene list outlines often give writers the willies. Just sitting down and creating a list of events that might happen in your story seems mind-numbing. How can that not inevitably sap all the joy out of actually creating and discovering the story? If you have to follow that dry old outline while writing the first draft, where's the fun of storytelling? This understanding by itself is single-handedly responsible for scaring many authors away from outlining. Number 2, does outlining mean creating story structure? The second most popular and much more accurate approach to outlines is the idea of creating a viable story structure for your novel before you actually start the first draft. In essence, this approach actually isn't that different from the scene list, but instead of randomly listing one scene after another, you're focusing on the major plot points and other structural moments and making sure they're all accounted for round about their proper timing in the story. This approach is a part of outlining, but by itself it isn't outlining. By itself, it also creates far too great a risk of sapping the creativity and spontaneity right out of your process. Number 3, does outlining mean brainstorming your story? So, if outlining isn't simply listing scenes or figuring out the story ahead of time, what is it? I once received an email from a disgruntled reader complaining that my approach to outlining, quote, never talked about outlining, end quote. I just sat there for a minute thinking, what? What I then realized was that this reader failed to understand the fundamental nature of a successful and nurturing outline. Outlining is brainstorming, pure and simple. Outlining isn't a process of sitting down for 30 minutes and coming up with a list of scenes that fits the 3-act structure. Not at all. Honestly, I shudder at just the thought of that. No wonder people get scared and bored by outlines if that's how they're approaching them. What outlining should be is a process of discovery. When you sit down to outline your story, you are entering an exciting zone of creativity in which you're embracing and sorting through all of your story's vast possibilities. You're asking informed questions to help you narrow down your story's best possibilities so you can enter your first draft equipped to write it in the best way. In short, outlining is all 3 of the above approaches rolled into one. Eventually, as you refine your outlining process, you're certainly going to be brainstorming story structure and scene lists. But if you try to create scenes and structure without entering through the door of creativity, you'll be setting yourself up for several major pitfalls, including stilted stories, boring first drafts, loss of interest in the story, and just generally a painful preparation period. So if you've experienced any of the above in previous outlining attempts, you can now breathe a sigh of relief. Your outlining is about to get really, really fun. But first, let me take a little detour and blow your minds with the thought that there is no such thing as plotters and pantsers. Very likely when you started listening to this episode, you identified yourself as belonging to one of 2 adamant and often antagonistic camps within the writing world. Plotters, also known as outliners, or pantsers, also known as those who write by the seat of their pants. The ongoing feud between these 2 camps is legendary. Mostly it consists of everyone thinking their way is better and resenting the other camp for doing the same. Now, I used to be a proud card-holding member of Outliners in Your Face. But then I realized 2 things in this order. Epiphany number 1, who cares what people do if it works for them. Certainly, there are great authors in both camps, so there is no concrete proof that one approach is better than the other. Epiphany number 2. The whole concept of plotting versus pantsing is a shell game. There's no such thing. Say what? Now here's a guarantee I feel absolutely safe in making. No matter who you are or how you prefer to approach writing, you cannot be exclusively a plotter or a pantser. You're both. We all are. We all plan some parts of our stories, whether it's extensively on paper, exclusively in our heads, or retroactively during revision. We all pants some parts of our stories, whether it's coming up with interesting scenes while brainstorming the outline, diving headfirst into a first draft with no idea where the scene is going, or just piecing together the specifics of a generally planned scene. Now, please note, this declaration isn't just my well-intentioned attempt to end the war. Rather, this is an important realization for any author. We need both parts of our brains when we write: creativity and logic, pantsing and plotting. You do not have to fit yourself into one box or the other. You're free to flow from one box to the next box according to your own preference. You may spend most of your process in the plotting box, or you may spend most of it in the pantsing box. Doesn't matter. Writing is all about gathering all the tools at your disposal and finding the approach that best optimizes your creativity in that particular moment. In short, even if you prefer to spend very little time in the planning stage before diving into the first draft, you can still benefit from an understanding of plotting and outlining. And that brings us to the first and foremost question facing any author getting ready to write that next book. Should you outline your novel before the first draft? And if you do, how much is the right amount of outlining for you? Now, I'm prejudiced, of course. I think my approach is the best. The novel is ultimately a complex and logical problem. When you approach it as an equation to be solved creatively within the bumper lane of an outline, you allow yourself enough space to make brilliant mistakes and avoid time-sucking dead ends later on. Getting the story straight before you begin your first draft means you can clear all that space in your brain to then worry about getting your prose right and crafting your narrative to best bring your characters to life. Now, this isn't to say an outline is the only way to solve the equation of your novel, but outlines make the difficult task of writing a novel much less difficult. If your storytelling instincts aren't yet honed to perfection, outlines allow you to use all of your brain to create a brilliant architectural blueprint before you order all the supplies and go out there to build an amazing suspension bridge or skyscraper. The outlining approach I use and teach is seriously in-depth. My finished outlines can run as much as 50,000 words in their own right and take me several months to complete. And some writers choke on this. But aside from the fact that all the time spent on outlines is just plain fun, I'm also spared the doubt and frustration of first drafts that don't work. My first drafts flow, and even better, they usually require very little in the way of major revision. So does that sound good? Good, because starting next Monday, we're going to dive into the best ways to maximize your creativity, answer your novel's most pressing questions, and create an outline that will deliver solid first drafts. And the best part? You get to pick and choose which pieces of this method work for you and your specialized mix of plotting and pantsing. So stay tuned. Next week, we're going to talk about the first 4 questions you need to ask yourself about your story when you start outlining.
Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.